Welcome to everyone participating in this conference of the Self-Knowledge course. Today we are going to study a very important subject. We will speak about how to control nocturnal emissions and sexual falls. The objective of this topic is to study certain aspects that prevent us from achieving perfect chastity. Therefore, this lecture is directed to those who have already begun to understand the value of their sexual energy and who sincerely wish to attain chastity. Someone who does not intend to manage this energy wisely, who has not yet understood its true importance, will not find much benefit in this teaching. But if we already comprehend that our sexual energy is the source of our power, and that within it lies the potential to reach enlightenment, then here we will discover very valuable guidance so that we never lose this energy again and can finally achieve perfect chastity. It is essential to value and safeguard our sexual energy because it is a creative force. When we learn to use it wisely, we can create our existential bodies. These bodies will allow us to awaken consciousness in all dimensions of nature, that is, to regenerate the physical and vital bodies, and to create the astral body, the mental body, and the causal body. In this way, we become capable of incarnating the human soul. To appreciate our sexual energy is to understand that we must not allow any psychological defect to steal it from us, and that we must stop creating new eyes or psychological defects that are produced when the sexual energy is expelled through orgasm and ejaculation. Once a person enters the path of regeneration, they begin working on themselves to abandon habits that lead to the expulsion of sexual energy through masturbation and ordinary sexual practices. However, to truly attain perfect chastity, it is also essential to stop losing energy through nocturnal emissions and to work diligently so that there are no sexual falls during encounters with one's partner. Let us now study the factors that lead to nocturnal emissions and sexual falls. Let us first clarify what is a nocturnal emission. A nocturnal emission is the spilling or loss of creative sexual energy while we are asleep. We know that when we sleep, our astral body becomes active. If sexual energy is stimulated through an erotic experience or dream in the astral world, the sensations that are lived in the astral body produce vibrations that travel to the physical body through the silver cord. As a result, the sexual energy is expelled from the physical body, which is what is commonly known as a wet dream. These experiences tend to occur more frequently and more intensely in single people. Therefore, it is extremely important to work on the aspects we will discuss today so we can avoid losing sexual energy while we are in the process of finding a stable partner of the opposite sex to practice supra-sex with. And what do we call a sexual fall? A sexual fall is the loss of sexual energy during the practice of sexual transmutation. This happens to couples who are already practicing supra-sex, who are working to achieve chastity, but who still do not have enough control over their sexual organs, nor over their instincts, emotions, and mind. Because of this, situations can arise during sexual practice in which one becomes overexcited and ends up expelling sexual energy. Therefore, it is essential that we eliminate the I of nocturnal emissions and the I of sexual falls, because they are formed by many elements and details that prevent us from attaining perfect chastity. Perfect chastity means never losing our sexual energy under any circumstance. In this lecture, we will study several aspects. We will examine the psychological factors that lead us to lose energy through emissions or falls, since most nocturnal emissions occur for psychological reasons. We will also analyze issues related to attacks that may come from the Black Lodge. In that section, we will study matters such as sleep paralysis and attacks from witches and sorcerers through the fourth dimension and during dreams. We will also consider certain external factors that may influence us. And finally, we will discuss aspects related specifically to the practice of supra-sex. Among the psychological factors that lead us to losing sexual energy through nocturnal emissions or sexual falls are impressions. Throughout the day, we receive countless impressions of every kind. Impressions enter through our five senses. We receive them through sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. For example, when we see, hear, smell, taste, or feel something with a lustful nature, something that awakens or stimulates lust within us. These impressions activate our energy centers in a negative way because when they enter us, our psychological defects begin to react. They produce emotions, sensations, mental projections, and inner dialogue. Through these untransformed impressions, our defects nourish themselves and contaminate our sexual energy. Impressions can be transformed when we are in a state of wakefulness, when we observe ourselves and remember ourselves. But if we become distracted and lower our guard, there is no one within us to transform the impression, and identification immediately takes place. As soon as we notice that an external impression has activated our sexual center, we must ask our Divine Mother to eliminate the psychological defect that has been stirred within us by that impression. For example, if I see someone I find attractive, and by observing myself I discover reactions in my sexual center, I immediately judge each detail that manifested within me and I ask, Divine Mother, eliminate this defect. And I do this for each detail I discover. Or if the impression comes through hearing, such as listening to music with sensual lyrics, hearing sounds that stimulate lust, or hearing someone complimenting our physical appearance, if we are attentive and observing ourselves, we will realize that what we hear also provokes reactions from our psychological defects. The same happens with smells, flavors, and sensations felt through the skin or the body, such as a touch, a hug, a vibration, or any stimulus that activates our sexual center. If we do not work on these impressions by immediately eliminating the defects that react through emotions, sensations, tensions, and thoughts, these impressions remain stored in our psyche. Then our defects take them and use them to make us identify in the astral world, leading us to lose sexual energy while we sleep. In the astral plane, these impressions take form and become scenes and situations, producing erotic dreams or intense experiences in which we lose sexual energy. These impressions also affect us when we practice supra-sex with our partner, because they return to our mind during the practice, distracting us and causing overexcitement. Furthermore, if we become identified with these impressions and allow our sexual energy to become activated during the day, then when we practice supra-sex, that energy will already be contaminated and heavy. For this reason, it becomes very difficult, or even impossible, to make that energy rise through the spine. It is important to reflect deeply on the need to abandon habits that constantly expose us to countless impressions. For example, through the excessive use of the internet, social networks, and video platforms, many people continually bombard themselves with impressions they never transform. Any impression that is not transformed can eventually lead to nocturnal emissions or sexual falls. Among the psychological aspects, we must also consider identifications. When we receive an impression and do not transform it through psychological death, but instead feed it, that impression becomes an identification. This happens because we identify ourselves with the defect that reacted within us due to that impression. We identify with a psychological defect when we give it attention, time, and energy. In daily life, we tend to identify with many things. We can easily see it. A person may quickly identify with anger, lust, greed, and so on. One may identify with lust because of a skirt seen on the street, or the shape of some legs, because of a person's chest, their eyes, their face, or simply their hair. We may identify with alcohol, overeating, and many other desires. Identifications can also lead to nocturnal emissions or sexual falls, because the defect we have identified with begins to misuse and contaminate our sexual energy. However, if we receive, for example, a visual impression, and in that very moment we work on it by asking for the elimination of the defect, then no identification occurs. The third psychological aspect we must analyze is lasciviousness. Lasciviousness is the frustrated desire for sex. From lasciviousness, many lustful eyes awaken, and as a result, we begin to feel sexual attraction toward practically anyone we see. If we do not work on eliminating the different details of lasciviousness, we constantly feed lust through the mind, trying to provoke ourselves sexually with everyone we see, or trying to provoke others. We also fall into the constant mistake of creating sexual fantasies. The problem is that we unconsciously seek to fulfill those fantasies during our erotic dreams, which leads to nocturnal emissions. Anyone who sincerely wants to achieve chastity must avoid impressions that fuel lasciviousness. One must work with discipline, observing and eliminating all frustrated sexual desire, along with its emotional, mental, and sexual manifestations. This ongoing frustration feeds all the lustful defects within us and continually activates sexual energy, which later may result in a sexual fall during supra-sex practice or a nocturnal emission while sleeping. The fourth psychological aspect we must pay attention to in order to put an end to nocturnal emissions and sexual falls are the lustful details. There are many small details of lust that appear in us throughout daily life. Sometimes they seem insignificant and we do not give them much importance, yet they also nourish lust. A simple example is flirting with another person. Even in this simple situation, many details of lust express themselves in all our inner centers, and these are precisely what led us to losing sexual energy. In Conference 43, we spoke in depth about these lustful details. If we truly long for chastity, it is essential to establish a daily discipline of eliminating every lustful detail that appears in us in our everyday life, and to meditate on those lustful elements we have nurtured throughout this existence. Let us remember that the only way we will gain the power to avoid losing sexual energy, whether voluntarily or involuntarily, is by eliminating lust from within ourselves, because lust is our greatest weakness. Now, there are other aspects we must study, because they can also cause the loss of creative sexual energy. Among these aspects, we must highlight the attacks that may come from the Black Lodge. The Black Lodge is made up of entities that seek to awaken in evil, and who survive and gain power by stealing the energy of others. Among these entities, witches are especially notable. Witches obtain power by stealing the energies of others. Therefore, when a person begins to preserve and accumulate their own energy, they must also learn to protect it from parasitic entities that will attempt to take it. A witch may try to steal our sexual energy at night through the fourth dimension, causing the spilling of sexual energy into the physical plane. Witch attacks are very often the cause of sleep paralysis. Through the fourth dimension, they try to stimulate sexual excitement in order to make the person lose energy, or they try to frighten the person. In this way, they steal energy through the emotion of fear. Likewise, if we practice supra-sex without sealing the place with protective conjurations, these entities can attack from the fourth dimension, sending fixed ideas or waves of lust to provoke a sexual fall so that they can feed on our energy. We may also receive attacks during sleep because these entities can enter our psychology through the fifth dimension and appear on the astral plane as very attractive and desirable figures, seeking to sexually stimulate us and lead us to lose energy. However, if we do not allow ourselves to identify with lust during these attacks, and if we eliminate the defects within us that react to them, we become closed and protected, and these entities cannot steal our energy. Because what gives power to negative entities is our weakness, and our weakness is our psychological defects, especially lust. It is essential to learn how to defend ourselves from these attacks carried out by the Black Lodge. This means that every night before sleeping, we must perform the Belilin conjuration and the magic circle. This is why it is so important to learn the conjurations and to keep ourselves spiritually protected as much as possible during the day, and especially whenever sexual practices are going to take place. A sexual practice without the Belilin conjuration and the magic circle is almost the same as ensuring a sexual fall. Let us remember that we learned these protective conjurations in Lecture 7 of this course. It is also very important to learn and practice the Jupiter conjuration to defend ourselves from direct attacks on the astral plane. We must also know that by placing steel scissors open in the form of a cross, surrounding them with a circle of black mustard, and making a plea to the elemental of the mustard to defend us, we can trap a witch that attempts to attack us through the fourth dimension. In this supplication, we ask the Father to order our elemental intercessor to communicate with the elemental of the mustard so that it may assist us in capturing the witch. Then, with the thumb, index, and middle fingers raised and pointing toward the mustard circle, we trace 3 circles while vocalizing the sound of the letter S. In this way, the mustard becomes ritualized. It is important to learn to defend and protect ourselves from these types of attacks so we can avoid any theft of our energy. Now, among the external aspects that may affect us, there is a very important factor we must work on, and that is the matter of food. We must understand that just as it is essential to take care of the impressions with which we nourish the mind, it is equally important to be mindful of the foods we introduce into the body, because certain foods directly harm our creative sexual energy and lead us to lose it. We must avoid consuming anything that contains pork, because pork decomposes creative sexual energy, and its harmful effects can last for up to 15 days. Likewise, we should also avoid foods prepared in pots or pans where pork has been cooked. We should not eat fish without scales, catfish, or swamp fish that feed on waste. We must also avoid farmed fish that are fed with pig feces or anabolic substances. We must refrain from foods that we know are toxic, spoiled, or unhealthy. Therefore, it is necessary to nourish ourselves with fresh foods. We should avoid sausages and cold cuts as much as possible, because most of them contain pork derivatives. Likewise, we must avoid consuming any type of alcohol, since it damages sexual energy and prevents chastity, as we studied in Conference 14. Any of these factors can lead to nocturnal emissions or sexual falls. Another external aspect we must take into consideration is what we call the level of the cup. Each of us has a kind of cup where our creative sexual energy accumulates. We will notice that we feel more sexually stimulated when this cup is full or more than half full. In this state, almost anything can easily trigger sexual activity because the instinct becomes very strong. This shows us that we must learn to manage the energy levels of our body. You all know very well that when a cup is full, it eventually spills. So when a person has their energetic cup very full, but has no partner to practice sexual transmutation with, or perhaps has a partner but cannot practice for health reasons or any other situation, what should be done to prevent that cup from overflowing? That person must learn to sublimate their energy. Therefore, we will now share the practice of energy sublimation. What does it mean to sublimate our energy? It is the process of learning to raise sexual energy to the brain through a breathing exercise. This exercise is known as pranayama. In it, we visualize the spine and the brain, and we consciously elevate the energy through two energetic channels called Ida and Pingala, which are located alongside the spinal column. In this practice, we visualize the sexual glands and the nose, and the essential point is to clearly imagine how the process unfolds. On one side flows Ida, and on the other flows Pingala. These two energetic serpents allow us to sublimate the energy through the vital body, using conscious breathing together with the mantra Ham Sa. We mentally pronounce the elongated mantra Ham while inhaling, and we verbally pronounce the short mantra Sa while exhaling. The inhalation lasts approximately 20 seconds, and the exhalation lasts about 2 seconds, followed by a brief pause before inhaling again. To perform sublimation, we cover the left nostril and inhale through the right nostril. As we do so, we imagine the energy rising from the left testicle, which is positive, toward the right nostril. We hold a brief pause, and then we inhale through the left nostril, imagining the energy ascending from the right testicle, which is negative, toward the left nostril. We visualize this clearly because to imagine is to see, and we observe the energy ascending through the channels of Ida and Pingala. In this way, we lower the level of the cup, maintaining our sexual energy at balanced and appropriate levels so that it does not spill or get lost. In the case of women, polarity is reversed. The signs change, but the process is exactly the same. Women begin with the right ovary toward the left nostril, and then from the left ovary toward the right nostril. Creative sexual energy is produced in the brain, specifically in the pineal gland, which gathers spiritual energy and unites it with sexual hydrogen. This exercise is regenerative and greatly benefits overall health. Sublimation should only be practiced once a day for about 10 minutes. We may dedicate 5 minutes to each gonad or alternate between them with each breath. 10 minutes daily is sufficient. The ideal time for sublimation is between 4 and 6 in the morning, when we are waking up and the vital body has restored energy to the physical body. Nothing more is needed. As you continue practicing, you will discover how simple, yet profoundly beneficial this exercise truly is. Another external aspect we must consider are the places we visit and the presence of what we call larvae. Larvae are residues of expelled energies. They behave like energetic parasites that try to provoke excitement in us so they can feed on our vital forces. There are many places people commonly visit that are full of these larvae: theaters, cemeteries, brothels, residences, motels, hotels, nightclubs, churches, erotic cinemas, and so on. Someone may go to sleep in a hotel room and see a perfectly clean bed physically. However, if that same bed were observed internally with clairvoyance, it would appear full of larvae due to the constant loss and waste of sexual energy that occurs in those places. Similarly, places like theaters, cinemas, concerts, and churches are often saturated with larvae because in these environments people tend to expel large amounts of emotional energy. Cemeteries, where bodies are decomposing, are places we should always try to avoid. They are full of larvae, and when we visit them, these larvae attach themselves to our vital body and begin to absorb our energy. A simple practical measure is to place a small pinch of sulfur inside our shoes. Sulfur prevents larvae from climbing up the body and reaching our room. It is always advisable to avoid these places. However, if for some reason we must go to any of them, it is beneficial to cleanse ourselves and our environment using the swastika cross. This cleansing is performed by drawing the symbol of the moving cross, or swastika, with sulfur on a tile and then burning that sulfur with alcohol. This moving cross represents the sexual force. It is very important to distinguish it from the Nazi swastika, which turns in the opposite direction and has a completely different meaning. While the sulfur is burning, we must keep the windows open so the space can properly ventilate, and we should leave the place temporarily so as not to inhale the sulfur fumes directly. Once the burning is complete, the remaining sulfur is simply discarded. Another point we must consider is the subject of menstruation. During a woman's menstrual cycle, it is recommended that the couple sleep separately, and this is for several reasons. During menstruation, the woman's energy is in a process of involution, and this state tends to attract the man's energy toward involution as well. In addition, during this period, a woman generates many larvae. For this reason, it is not advisable for her to sleep in the same bed where supra-sex is practiced, nor is it recommended for the man to sleep beside her at that time. Also, any affectionate or intimate caresses during this week tend to revive psychological defects that were already dormant or weakened. Another important recommendation for women is to avoid getting the head, the spinal column, or the sexual organs wet during menstruation. Instead, hygiene should be done using local cleansing with a damp cloth. Bathing or getting wet during this period can cause menstrual cramps and create sexual coldness in the woman. It is also essential to understand that the menstrual process lasts 7 days, even if the bleeding is shorter. Therefore, during these 7 days, the woman should not wash her hair, should avoid full-body bathing, and should not sleep in the same bed where she practices sexual intercourse with her partner. Now, let us look at some aspects that are directly related to the practice of supra-sex. We must always remember to ask for the assistance of our Divine Father and Divine Mother before beginning sexual practice. We should never engage in the practice without first performing the Belilin conjuration and establishing the magic circle, because otherwise we may be exposed to attacks. It is also essential to maintain control over the mind and sustain proper concentration during the practice. A lack of concentration is a primary cause of sexual falls, because such falls occur when we allow the mind to wander. Our consciousness is exactly where our mind is. Therefore, we must focus on the ascension of the energy through the spine toward the point located between the eyebrows. During sexual practice, our attention should remain on our own sexual glands and spine, not on our partner's body or sexual organs, because focusing on the partner leads to overexcitement and the loss of energy. All movements during the practice should be gentle and controlled. Sudden or rapid movements must be avoided so that overexcitement and orgasm do not occur. Throughout the entire practice, we must remain fully in the present moment, so that it is our consciousness that lives the experience and guides it. The bedroom should be impeccably clean and well ventilated. remembering that masters from other dimensions come to assist us in this sacred work. It is advisable not to use old mattresses or beds that were previously used for fornication, because they are usually filled with larvae. For newlyweds, it is also recommended not to spend the honeymoon in hotels, because the beds in such places are considered black beds. Even if they appear physically clean, many hotels and motels are environments associated with negative influences. And one final point, which is also extremely important to keep in mind, concerns the caresses that couples give each other, whether they are dating or married, during times when they are not going to engage in sexual practice. Most people are unaware that caresses awaken sexual energy. This energy becomes activated even from the very first kiss or affectionate touch. However, if that energy is awakened and does not rise or evolve, then it will inevitably descend or devolve. What does this mean? It means that when sexual energy is stimulated or excited outside the moments intended for the practice of supra-sex, that energy becomes heavy and dense, and eventually it becomes contaminated. Later, when that person goes to bed, they may experience a nocturnal emission. Or if later they go to practice supra-sex with their partner, because they are already carrying this heavy and contaminated energy, they will very likely experience a sexual fall. Therefore, activating sexual energy only during the sexual practice will also help us develop a great deal of sexual strength and potency during the practice itself. All of these recommendations we have discussed are extremely valuable, and if we truly aspire to achieve perfect chastity, they will be of great help to us. Thank you very much for participating in this topic. I invite you to join us in our next conference, where we will address a very important subject. We will speak in depth about the eye of witchcraft. In that conference, we will understand that every one of us carries the witch eye within, and that it is essential to eliminate it. We will also clearly examine the great differences between a black magician and a white magician. Don't miss it.